Kat Cole is a seasoned executive and leader with deep expertise building global brands, businesses, and high-performing teams. She's a board member, investor, and advisor with broad experience in leading consumer brands, food, retail, scaling franchise organizations through various stages of growth, and more. She's also the former COO and president of Focus Brands, the parent company of Cinnabon, Jamba, Auntie Anne's, and four more chains, all of which I have enjoyed throughout my lifetime, and a growth leader who has built businesses at the intersection of Main Street and Wall Street, connecting big brands and businesses with small and mid-sized independent business owners. Welcome to the Resilient Virtual Tour, the extraordinary Kat Cole.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Hi, thank you for joining me. I'm so excited
Me too.
to be in conversation with you. So just as some background, I first heard about you from one of my former clients, Sultan Hayden, who ran CC's Coffee House. My first business, Solid Ground Innovations, we did PR, and Community Coffee and the Siraj family, they were one of our clients. And I remember Sultan speaking about you because one, your background is very similar, in which he kind of rose from this very traditional background. He didn't finish college as well. And so I think that you led very much so a very inspiring story for even when it inspired him as well. And he was thinking about, okay, what do I do next? And how do I utilize what she's done in my own career? And we used to often have these conversations in the work that he was doing. So that was the first time that I actually heard your name. The second time is that I was traveling through New York back home to Louisiana, and I got a email from Jewel Burke-Solomon. And she was like, I'm putting on this conversation around partnerships with Kat Cole. If you are in Atlanta, you should come. And so I came to that conversation. It was in a conference room. I can't even recall.
Village.
Yes. And I left out with so many notes about partnerships and how you thought about partnerships and how you brought together some of the names that we know and love today. So I would definitely love to talk about that as well. So thank you, Kat, for joining me.
Yeah, the universe has been slowly bringing us together over.
I feel that. I truly feel that. So I would love to kind of jump in to talk a little bit about your background. Something else that we have in common is that we were, for the most part, most of our lives raised by a single mother. My mother, I remember the day that my mother packed up her car. My father's addiction was gambling, amongst other things, but gambling one of the big things. And I remember the day packing up and my mother saying, we're like leaving. And I often too talk about my mother's, just the importance of her in my life, in my story, to the point sometimes I'm being interviewed, I'm like, are people tired of me talking about my mother? Are people like over this by now? Because I always kind of go back to her when it comes to like the foundation, because I feel like it's just such a part of my story and where I am. But I would love to know about your background. We're both from the South, so that's also something we have in common.
Our birthdays are pretty close. I think. We're sisters from another mister.
Yes.
Very similar to you. I remember the day when I was 9, my sisters were 6 and 3. And we were in our house, which was the nicest house of anyone in our family. It was a small and simple house, but it wasn't a trailer. It wasn't a car. Mm-hmm. We were the middle class, therefore looked pretty rich from the other sides of the family, because my dad, although he was a raging alcoholic, had a fancy job. And so it's one of the reasons my mom held on for so long, because he was providing this life that no one else on either side of our family had financially. We had a house. I even had a playhouse in the backyard. We had a car. We had gifts every holiday season in abundance. I remember my dad would get his, Christmas bonus, his holiday bonus, and we'd have all these gifts. He was a generous drunk. Mm-hmm. And I remember the day where she sat me down and she said, that's it, I'm done, we're leaving. And I knew what she meant. And I did not cry and I didn't get upset. I just looked at her and said, what took you so long?
Mm-hmm.
at the age of 9. And the lesson I've always found from that moment, once I got older and reflected, I didn't know it then, is that the people who are closest to the action, like you, the little girl with your mom, me, the daughter in the scenario, we know it's bad. We don't know what to call it. We don't have the language to articulate the problem or the solution, and we don't have the authority to do something about it. You or I couldn't have moved ourselves out of that situation.
Right.
It took the leader to get to a point where they just decided that, on one hand, at least for my mom, up to that point, she thought, well, things could be worse. At least we have this nice house. At least we have, this lifestyle that is better than anyone else in the family has. And my mom had people on both sides of the family and her friends telling her, yeah, I know it's tough, but you're so lucky.
Mm-hmm.
You're so lucky to have the things you have. It's a small price to pay. And she believed it until she didn't. And part of that was I was in car accidents with my dad from drunk driving. There were other things that happened. And so she just finally decided that just because things could be worse, technically they could have been worse, that doesn't mean she didn't have the right, and in this case, the responsibility to try to change things for the better. And so we left, and she fed us on a food budget of $10 a week for 3 years. And people who haven't lived like that don't understand. Like, it sounds like a lie. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like a hyperbole.
Right.
It's not. A lot of people can live on far less than many people think, especially those in business circles that, are in positions of either privilege or prominence or have really good jobs and always have. And so that was formative for me, I'm sure, like it was for you, because of the level of responsibility I had to take from such a young age. And that would lead to me kind of showing up in the world with a sense of, a sense of deep humility, because I was just always looking to learn and grow and be better than what my past would indicate I might end up getting trapped in. And everything that was new was advancement for me. So I said yes to a lot, and I learned a lot, and I certainly didn't want to let people like my mom down. So I had this chip on my shoulder to make her incredibly proud. And yet I also had to start working at a very young age because we didn't have any money. So to pay for a car and insurance and college, which I eventually was the first person to get into college. And that then led to a series of crazy events in the restaurant industry that we can get into if you'd like. But those were the early days.
Yes. And I think about kind of my journey, even through college. I often felt, okay, I'm going to be successful because I wanted to help my mother. So my father owned a cement company. And so very much so similar to you, we were seen as the family that was more well off than other family members. But my mom, when she left my father, at the time she wasn't working, she went and got a job at Kmart, and she would work long hours at Kmart to provide for us as well. We moved in with my grandmother, and we lived off very little. And I think that I always try to bring light to what it's like in the rural South, because I grew up in the rural South, and what poverty looks like in the rural South and how it's so different than urban poverty. And, there's no transportation, there is no library. There's so much you don't have. That I find people just generally, because they just never have grown up like that, aren't aware of. And so, I'm matriculating through college, and I'm just thinking, I'm speeding through college, like 18, 20 hours a semester, because in my head, I'm going to create this better life for my mother that I felt that she had a glimpse of, but wasn't able to have it for long. One, with my father leaving the house, but also my father passing at a very young age for us. And so I think about that trajectory for me. And then my mother passed away. I was like, oh my gosh, what next?
Yeah.
And that kind of pushed me into entrepreneurship and that continuous idea of striving to achieve and just continuously saying yes, continuously trying to elevate in my own career. Would love to know, like, what happens next for you. I know most people see the headlines, Hooters to COO, but what was that journey like for you? I have something that you had said in another interview I listened to, but I'm going to save that for later.
The journey was really interesting. One, from the time I was a waitress at Hooters, which was my third job. When I was 15, I worked in malls to sell clothes. I cleaned gym equipment for trade out because I needed to have workouts for track and cheerleading, and I couldn't afford a gym membership. So it was like a barter job. And the clothing company when I was 15 was important because I got a discount on clothes for me and my family. So I made money. I was a top salesperson. I realized I actually loved sales, at least a version of sales. And I got a discount on clothes, and nice clothes, like name brand clothes, which you mentioned Kmart. I mean, I remember walking through Kmart. I don't know if you remember, they made this popcorn, we would go get the popcorn.
Yes.
So I would walk through all the aisles, like the silk pajamas, and like run my hands through it. And we would be making our way to the back to the layaway counter. Like,
yes,
and with no clothes, with no brands. I mean, I remember this one outfit. I have a picture of it. It's this horrible, it was like black and white checks with red suspenders with shorts, and from Kmart layaway. And it's like the symbol of growing up at that time.
Yes.
And so all these jobs, were helping me break out of that a little bit. And when I turned 18, graduated high school, got into college, started as a computer sciences and electrical engineering major at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, and was still working at Hooters, but I shifted from being a hostess to a waitress, and made better money as a waitress, which was great. So I worked nonstop. And one day the cooks quit and I ended up working in the kitchen, and the bartender had to go home. So I learned how to work the bar. And very quickly, I knew how to work every job in the restaurant. I wasn't trying to become a restaurant manager or a food executive. My plan was to finish my engineering degree, go to law school, and become an attorney for an engineering company. Like, that was I don't know how that seed got put in my brain, but that was where I was going in my mind. And so all of this stuff was just a means to some other end. I was a normal passing through employee. But I loved it. I loved being a waitress. I loved being a cook. I really enjoyed it. And people would tell me when I was 18, you're going to run this place one day. When I was a waitress, the regulars would say that. The other servers would say that. I'm like, I'm not going to, come on. I don't want that. I don't want to be shaking chicken wings the rest of my life, even though I loved it. And then Hooters started growing around the world internationally, and they needed existing employees who were top employees who already trained new hires to go travel to open these stores. So the really fast version is I was asked to go to Sydney, Australia to launch the first ever Hooters franchise there when I was 19. I had never been on a plane. I did not have a passport. I'd never opened a new store in my life, but I said yes, flew to Miami, my first ever flight, got my passport expedited, and then left for Sydney a few weeks later. And that set off a chain of events where I started opening franchises around the world. And before I knew it, I had launched the franchise on 3 continents in 9 months. I was failing college because I was never there. So I dropped out of college. Luckily for me, Hooters was growing the corporate office as well. They reached out and said, we want you to interview for a corporate job to run the training department at the age of 20. So I interviewed, I got the job, I moved to Atlanta. And as the company grew, I grew. By the time I was 26, I was one of the vice presidents of the company. We were doing 800 million in revenue. We were fully vertically integrated. We owned our own supply chain, our own marketing company, our own restaurants, as well as franchises around the world. And I was having a blast. It was an unexpected, accelerated path to being a corporate executive at a bizarrely young age. And I was there as an executive for 6 years, growing as the company grew, with all kinds of interesting experiences and lessons while I was there. And then, became president of Cinnabon just before I turned 32. Yeah. And that was in the middle of the recession. So I needed to turn the business around, a mall and airport business in the heart of what is still called the Great Recession. Was a very difficult business model to address, but we did it beautifully with a great team and partnerships, as you've mentioned, and just like the great poet Drake says, started at the bottom, now we're here. It's definitely the theme of my life. It's what I did at Hooters. It's what I did at Focus Brands, and eventually ended up becoming the president and COO of Focus Brands, $5 billion in sales company, 7 brands, 7,000 locations, franchise and corporately owned, and a huge CPG omni-channel business that I helped grow.
Yes. So I was listening to a interview, and the individual asked you, how did you get the job as COO, and how do you get them to take a chance on you? And I love how you reshaped the question, and essentially, in so many words, was like, I was qualified. But what you said was, you didn't do it with your resume alone, that you also were volunteering, that you had gave so much to the industry, even ahead of that. And I really loved how you reshaped the question and then brought back a lot of the work and the legwork that you had put in over the years leading up into that point. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I think that people do think, well, maybe I did get a job because of my resume, but even how people look at what you're doing outside of that, right? Yeah. What you're giving back to the industry as a whole.
Yes. For me, I realized that because my background up to the point that I became president of Cinnabon, I had so much rich experience in business, in nonprofits, as you mentioned. But if you just looked at my resume, what it looked like was, I'm a college dropout that started as a Hooters girl and have only worked at Hooters my whole life. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have made it through most people's HR filter. They would have burned that paper if it made it through the fax machine. Like, don't even let that be in our office. And so I was honest that I didn't look as great as other candidates on paper. And I didn't like it, but it was true. And so I realized that there were a few things that gave me an unfair advantage. That gave me an unfair disadvantage. The unfair advantages, I think we always have a little bit of both.
Right.
The unfair advantages I had, to your point, I had been volunteering in the restaurant industry, well, in my local community, and leading nonprofit mission-driven teams, which is in some ways more difficult leadership than leading paid employees. So I was building my leadership muscle locally. And at the same time, I was chair of the board of the Georgia Restaurant Association when I was 27 years old. So I was leading a nonprofit with governance on a board of directors. And not only did that give me another leadership life to live and therefore grow from, it gave me visibility to others who saw me as something other than my resume. Yes, they knew I'd worked for Hooters. Yes, they knew what was on the resume, but they saw me lead through financial difficulty. They saw me launch new programs. They saw me onboard new board members. They saw me deal with amazing moments of opportunity for the industry and really dark, difficult moments. And so They saw me as Kat the leader, not Kat the Hooters executive. And I am convinced, I remember the day that I was leading a political advocacy fundraiser for the Restaurant Association, and I had mustered up the courage to invite, even though I was a meager vice president of a large company, but nonetheless wasn't a CEO. I worked with the Georgia Restaurant Association to put together an event with Ted Turner at Ted Turner's house in Atlanta, and invited the CEOs of all the Georgia-based restaurant companies. And about 80% of them came. So here I am in Ted Turner's penthouse with all these CEOs, and you can imagine what they all look like. Right. I'm in the industry. I'm not criticizing them as individuals. I'm just pointing out
the industry itself. Yes.
Yeah. And I've got the mic, and I'm rarely nervous. It's just, I'm human. My body reacts to high stress scenarios, but I don't get in my head the same way people do about speaking. And so I was very comfortable. But even then, I realized the weight of the moment. One, I wanted to raise funds to help people that would do more for small business owners and hourly workers and things like that. But I was a little nervous. And after that event, it was very successful. I started getting recruited by the CEOs that were there. That is not why I did it. And I started having coffees with them, not because I wanted to leave my company. I loved my company, because I enjoyed leaning in and learning from them. And for sure, if I had not held that event, and if the CEOs and the executives of focus brands had not been there, I would not have been on their radar or made it through the filter to be interviewed to be the president of Cinnabon. I know that for sure, but I could have never expected or known that when I organized that event. I did it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I was giving of my time. I was shaping the industry that I'm in. And as a result, people saw me as more than what was on the piece of paper. And it's the way that many men benefit from informal networks, right? They're doing, they get seen as the people they are, not just the jobs they have. And not only does that open the relationship door, but it also allows people to see you as something different than the paper would define. And that is a bit of the hack of the game.
Yeah.
And so it led to being asked to interview, to work in this amazing company that would become a 10-year chapter to my career that I just wrapped up, from president of Cinnabon to group president of the company. 4 years later, just 2 years later, president and COO, which is the role I had for 4 years before I left just this January.
Yes. So I love that how you framed that, because I often tell people, I think people look at you where you are now, and even myself, and they're like, well, so you know all these people and you can like reach out to them. But I was like, but it wasn't always that way. Like I wasn't born into relationships and a network and with a silver spoon. No one knew my last name. I didn't have a popular last name. But what you just described is how you begin to even unintentionally build your network by being intentional about doing the work and truly wanting to help people, right? And I think that it can never just be understated that it's through these acts, these consistent acts, that these things happen for you, and you can have these chance encounters. And I often talk about, you never know when you're going to meet someone or something's going to happen that completely changes your trajectory and your life. And it can happen like overnight, which is the insane thing.
I think too, to your point, even tying this to how you kicked this off of how we've encountered each other. And then I've heard of you from just business news for your accomplishments, from Daily My Husband Engage.
Yes, he was on paternity leave when I was engaged. So I didn't get to say.
So being invested in you and your company, and hearing him rave about what just a brilliant business person you are, and what a phenomenal business your business is. And then later more social media interaction, and then Twitter, Clubhouse, other spaces. And these are just dots. That everything doesn't lead to everything all at once.
Right.
Then when, and then it's like, oh, you're launching a book. Oh, I want to like read that. I want to support that. I want to be all in on that. Like that, these are the things that bring us into each other's orbit over time. And the more of those little dots, the easier it is for us to trust each other. The easier it is to be an advocate for other people, even if we don't know them well. There are enough of these points where we can shine light on others, or support, or ask for support from other people, because we feel some sense of familiarity. It's not actually totally cold.
I agree. And it's similar to how you reached out to all of these CEOs, and they could have told you no. And even when I was reaching out to people, I was like, well, they can't tell me no, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I can tell you no.
And see what they say. And so you're right. I've followed you on Twitter, and from following you on Twitter and the things that you're saying, the things that you're a part of, I was like, wow, Kat is always giving like a masterclass in humility, empathy, discernment, and just being intentional. And I'm curious to know just how you would describe yourself. Just because when I was like, okay, what would Kat do? And I've become more vocal and have tweeted more and talked more on social media probably over the past year than I ever have. I'm usually like laying low and just like watching and, taking in. And the way you communicate on social and how you communicate it just really, really just feels so intentional. And it's filled with so much humility and so much like listening, understanding. And this is what I'm getting just from tweets, y'all. So this is the power of the communicator that is Echo. But how would you describe yourself?
I do think I have a blend of humility and confidence. There's a humble confidence where I feel that I belong wherever I am. And even if others don't see it that way. And so that there's a confidence there, but it's not because I think I'm right or I'm the best or I know what others in a place know. It's because I believe I can figure it out. And those are two different types of confidence. There's a type of confidence that says, I am it, I am all, I can only teach, I can't learn. I know what I'm doing. No one ever knows fully what they're doing. And so my confidence is much more of a humble confidence that I definitely don't know everything I'm doing, but I believe in people. I believe in my ability to learn from people and connect with them and help them, and for most to help me, which means we will figure it out, which means I will figure whatever it is out that I'm doing in a moment or a place or a company. And then the humility, it comes from a lot of the places I'm sure it comes from with you, our upbringing. And it's not so long ago that I don't remember it. And even though I've had many different lived experiences then, that if I took a snapshot of them and put them on Instagram, a moment where I'm on a big boat or on a private plane or these moments where they look like this life, those moments are so tiny. And by the way, I don't own a boat or a plane. It's somebody else's boat. So, and just want to make that clear. And, but those moments are so singular and limited compared to all the other dots that are whatever people want to call it, the humble making moments, the hustle, the grind, growing up with just because you want it doesn't mean you can have it.
Right.
And that's okay. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. And there's actually a way to learn to turn unmet want into admiration, and instead of envy or thinking lowly of myself, or my family. And so that upbringing, like when we would drive through nice neighborhoods, my mom would say, I wish we had a house like that. And it was just, isn't that beautiful? And when people would do really fancy holiday lights that cost a lot of money and take like a team of people to set up, isn't that beautiful? Instead of, why don't we have that? And so there's just this attitude. Some of it's probably nature, but more of it is likely nurture from my mom and growing up and seeing a real mix of have and have nots. And even those that have, it was still much less than what other people had.
Right.
Growing up with that resilience is humbling. And it is easy to lose it, because I think we probably both know and have seen people who forget and who lose that humility. It's also not hard to keep it. And I am obsessed with staying close to the action, close to my community. I try to keep a very simple mindset, live simply. And hey, if I needed to go back to be a waitress or a bartender tomorrow, I loved those jobs.
Yeah.
Very good at them. And I'd be more tired. I'm older now, but I could do it. And
right.
I would love myself still doing that. And having that place to come home to, that center, is incredibly empowering. So I'm humbly confident, but I am empowered because I know I'm real on the things I actually don't need, and try to hold close the things that I do, my health and wellness, my family, friends, and community.
Yes. And I do think it comes from, just as people would say, humble beginnings. And I always say something that my mother passed along to me was she always did what needed to be done. And I'm like, whatever needs to be done, I'm going to do it because that's just how I grew up. My mother always provided, even if it was not the only, whatever she could provide, she provided for us and her kids.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think about, whereas me too, if I had to go back and work wherever, I had a very short stint at McDonald's that didn't last very long. And I was at a great McDonald's to begin with. I always tell people, I joke about this when people say, what was your first job? I was like, actually, my first job was at McDonald's. But as a kid, everybody wanted to work at McDonald's at 15. Yeah. I don't know, for some reason. Yeah. That was the thing, that big M. And I remember getting placed inside a McDonald's that was inside of a Walmart.
Yep.
And it was not a good experience. However, I told my friends, I was like, on my last day, they had me clean this fridge that literally had been touched in, I couldn't tell you when. Ooh. But I cleaned it because something that you said, you're still a part of the team until you're not.
Oh, yes, you are.
And I was like, I'm going to just chalk it up. I'm going to do the job. But, I know that this is my last day, but I'm still going to do it and not just like walk out, right? Most people are like, you should have just walked out. I'm like, no, I was still on the clock. And this is what I signed up for.
I love that you just brought that up. It's something I don't think I've talked about on any podcast, the you're on my team until you're not mentality. And I felt that about myself, like you did, which is I'm all in until my last day, right? Mm-hmm. My last day is the last day, not the day before, not the week before. The last day is the last day. I'm all in every day until I'm gone. I also have that mentality for my team. And, on my teams, not everyone's always at peak performance. Yeah. And so this idea, I remember having tough conversations with people who were having a season or a prolonged performance issue or challenge, or someone coming to me complaining about someone else not pulling their weight on the team. And I would often start with, you or they are on my team until you're not. Mm-hmm. Like it creates this bubble of psychological safety. Like whatever I say is not the end until we decide it's the end.
Yeah.
And that it's also a way to kind of show where my heart is. Like I'm not going to feed into the predictable demise of people in a role, and I'm not going to tolerate others treating people who I am paying to be on our payroll as if they are not of that value. And at some point, if they're not, that's a decision I or we need to make. But that line, you're on my team until you're not, is a cultural statement that I wish more would think about and get to.
So you mentioned culture, which is literally one of the next questions I was about to ask, because I'm constantly interviewing people as we've been growing our team pretty significantly. And it's one of the questions that often comes up, like what type of culture do you want to create? And I have been finding myself thinking about that more and more. Every time someone asks me that, I think about it more and more. Am I giving a good enough response? That's what I think about. Is this a good enough response? And I think about, how do I want my company to look like? Yeah. But when you think about that question and truly, like, how do you build a good team culture, and what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it is the number one question. I think any interviewee, we know when I get to the part where, what questions do you have for me? It's number one. It's number one, and has been for a couple of years now, which I love. And to your point, most companies don't have a culture so strong, and even if it is so well articulated that you can like answer that with a commercial.
Right.
And so the good news is it's a very real moment. And my answer often is what I hope our people would tell you our culture is, right? I'm like making it about the fact that I'm not going to give you something that's on a poster, because I don't believe that's what culture is. I think posters are important. Help. And so I will say, look, I encourage you to ask other people you talk to that question. And I hope you find some common threads that evidence there are some themes here that are about how we work together and how we show up for each other and what we want the company to represent in people's lives. But here's what I would hope they would say. And I am always honest. I think every time I've answered that question, I have said something of the, type of comment like, we're on a journey, it's evolving, we're learning and growing, we deal with some challenges now. And, I just envision truly, if they were to ask 10 people in the company, what's the truth? And the truth is, especially if a company is in a high growth phase, I just wrote about this in one of my newsletters, it is more likely to be having cultural issues than it is likely to be growing its cultural strength, because the simple act of hiring many people in short amounts of time is infusing the company with people who aren't currently plugged into the company's culture. I didn't say match the company's culture, because I think you should keep expanding and evolving the culture with new hires, but there need to be linkages and some points of connection and values alignment with folks. And if you're hiring a lot of people, there's literally no way that happens on its own. So those are my answers. And then whatever the answers are, I'll say, here's what's going on with respect in the workplace. And here's how I view our intensity in this company or this brand. And here's our orientation toward customer versus employee. I try to talk about those things to help them really get a sense of where we're growing, what our pain points are. And my hope in answering honestly and vulnerably is that they'll at least be like, well, at least she's not trying to BS me with some goals and butterflies with a values statement. And I also want a new hire to come in eyes wide open. We're not perfect. And so I don't want to tell you we're this and you make the decision to join the company because that matches some dream in your mind. And then you go work for Bob and Bob is not demonstrating, all the elements of the culture. And so I think building a great culture starts first with it being obvious that it's important to leadership. And then leadership connecting with the team members that are growing on an ongoing basis to talk about it and continually capture some of the few most common behavioral traits of the culture. And then, yes, it's on a poster, it's on cards, it's on emails, and then it's regularly talked about, aligned with how people are behaving. And it is rewarded when it is seen, and it is called out and corrected when someone is in conflict with it. And then third, it needs to evolve. Just thinking about a values statement for a company, one I often use is we're always present. I've seen that a lot in cultural statements. We're present. Well, what does that mean behaviorally when everyone's in remote work? And have you evolved what that means and given permission for that to change and restructured how those behavioral expectations are set? And that's just a silly example, but a relevant one of how a value statement means different behaviors potentially over time. And as people are being hired when the company is 4 times the size as when that statement was written, or and 10 different offices when that statement was written, or 2 different countries, these things, they're living and breathing. And if they don't change, the company starts to be in violent conflict with its promises to itself.
Yeah. And, I've talked to so many people who have seen companies go from a couple hundred to a couple thousand. And they talked about how sometimes departments begin to create their own culture.
Yes, absolutely. And it's even more dramatic if there are separate offices. They're like different countries.
Yes. We always think about that because we have an office here in New Orleans and then we have an office in New York. And so it's very interesting dynamics because of just New Orleans and the culture of New Orleans and the culture of New York City, but trying to always ground the teams in like community. And even like the conversations that we have in interviews, it's like, oh, how are you attached to your community? Whatever you see and define as community, right? And what does that mean to you? And I feel like the way people respond to like those type of answers really give insight on how they'll fit into the culture that you're trying to create.
Totally.
So shifting to partnerships, because I told you earlier how I sat in this conversation that you gave in Atlanta and literally left with like 3 pages of notes around partnerships. So building teams is important, but also partnerships can transform in many ways a business and company. And I would consider you like an architect of bringing big brands together to create powerhouse partnerships. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about one of your most exciting partnerships that you brought together, and then also about how can like smaller businesses or startups think about partnerships that may not have like that brand appeal to connect the dots with another business brand.
Yeah, there were so many, especially with Cinnabon. When I took over Cinnabon, as I mentioned, it was in the recession. So we had to evolve the business model of the base business, the franchise business. And at the same time, we realized we had this equity and these ingredients and recipes and a ton of unmet demand. There were only so many times people will go to a mall or an airport, and there are many other places they go where it wasn't difficult to see the opportunity for us to provide a taste of the brand they love. Not the same thing necessarily, but a taste of it in grocery stores, in other fast food chains, in hotel bakeries. There were so many ways to think about the brand going places the customer would give it permission to go, important, in formats that were right for those environments. Also a critical, thought path. And then given those opportunities, the question was, how do we do it? We didn't own manufacturing plants. All the cinnamon rolls in Cinnabon are made, fresh in shop. Literally there's flour and a mixer and people are rolling out the dough and you're seeing the
right. We see it.
You see it. There's no one like popping out, fully made cinnamon rolls. And so, but we needed to find a way to manufacture products because you're talking a completely different scale of inventory needs and consumption, shipping it to not our what was then 800 locations in the US, but to thousands, tens of thousands of grocery stores and QSR. So first question was, are we going to manufacture the versions of this product that we think make sense in these various channels? And we experimented with some of our brands. We built or bought manufacturing plants and tried to do it ourselves and realized that is not our core competency. Franchising, building brands, ideating and innovating, consumable product, running our own brick and mortar operations, those were our strengths. So it became clear that in the question of should we rent, build, or buy a capability, that this is one where we should rent it from someone else. We're not going to go buy. We tried to buy the plants. That wasn't a great investment. Building it from the ground up is too slow. We're going to rent it. And the way we rent it is by partnering with someone who has the capability we need, but that we don't have or want to build or buy. And so in one case, one of my favorite Cinnabon products was Cinnabon K-Cups, Cinnabon coffee. Like when people would ask me for a gluten-free Cinnabon product, and fat-free, I would point them to the coffee. You could have a Keurig Green Mountain Cinnabon cinnamon roll flavored coffee. It's still one of their top selling SKUs today, like 9 years later. It's this delicious light roast. I remember taking our whole team up to their flavor laboratories to get the aromatics right and the flavors right. And it was just a wild success, still like growing up and to the right. And that partnership, there's so much to learn in that partnership. And I share that one because it's a less obvious one. It's not a bakery product. It's not food per se. We had no real capabilities in coffee manufacturing or retail distribution. We had no relationships with retailers to sell that product directly. But Keurig Green Mountain had all of that. They are the leader in coffee. They are the leader in retail relationships, and they had a fast growing, far before it was cool, direct to consumer and e-commerce business, and direct to individual consumers, as well as direct to offices and enterprise. And so if you're honest about what you don't have, but what you could benefit from, it starts to paint the picture very clearly of who you need to call. And sometimes if you become known for partnering, those companies start calling you. And so then you're managing outbound and inbound, intention and creation with reaction to opportunity, which is a different set of challenges, sort of a first world problem when you're having success partnering. But this idea of acknowledgement of what you want to rent, build, or buy, being sure it's something that's good for the customer and the brand, and then finding a best-in-class partner to pair with, where what they bring you adds value and what you bring them adds value. And you structure the financial agreement in such a way that it honors the very unique value each of you bring. And as a result, you give up some percentage points and some margin versus what it would take for you doing it yourself, but you get there faster in a bigger way, and the pie is much bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that most people, when we think about like small businesses, trying to translate that to your startup, to your small business, because a lot of times people are like, how do I get this other brand to partner with me so that we can have a collaboration or something that can begin to be mutually beneficial for both? But oftentimes smaller brands are like, oh, well, what am I bringing to the table, right? That would make this brand want to partner with me.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to think about that. One is what your brand stands for. You may be surprised, even if you're small, is exactly the type of affiliation someone needs. So what if your brand is something very cool and of an important cultural moment, and you really represent relevance to a particular community? I assure you, there are companies that would benefit from that association. So that's one, just thinking about who would benefit from what you stand for, that you help them get there faster. Now, you also need to make sure you're not putting the brand, even if it's small, that you've built, partnering with someone that will dilute your brand. They may need you way more than you need them. So just do your homework. Make sure you're not getting taken advantage of, even if you're small. The other way is to think about audience. So some businesses are very small, but they've built a nice social audience. They have reach with a specific set of consumers that another company would love to tap into. So again, make sure the partnership is something that's good for your audience. You don't want to just be seen as like hawking someone else's wares to your customer, because they won't like that either. But if the fit feels good, if it's a sneaker company with a sunglasses company, if it's a gluten-free bakery company with a local coffee shop, you can start to see the ways that these things can work together. And I am always of the mindset, find the coalition of the willing. Don't beat your head against the wall. Do the work to try to find people who sort of get what you're about, and then make it low risk for them. Temporary, at cost, or free if you can afford it. If not, at cost. Just do a pop-up, do a promotion, do an event, and then blow their mind so that they want to do it more often. Starting small is the way to get big faster, ironically.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I recall you saying that you've been fortunate to work with and for women your entire career.
Yeah.
And when I heard you said that, I was like, oh, that's rare. I feel like it's becoming more common now, but generally speaking, oftentimes that's not the case. What do you believe was different about that experience that many may never get to experience? Hopefully people will get the experience working for a woman. I will say that. But what are people missing out on?
Part of it was, so from the time I was hired when I was 15 until the first time I reported to a CEO. So, who knows how many bosses, managers, leaders I had. Only a handful, maybe 2 to 4 were men. So easily 15, 16, 17 were women. All the women in the clothing store, it was a women's clothing store, who they were my first bosses. And the woman who hired me as a hostess at Hooters, Bonnie, who herself had been a Hooters girl and was then, promoted to general manager of this high volume restaurant. And then again, some occasional male managers in there, but mostly female. And then the executives that sent me off on openings were women. And I ended up working for them in the corporate office in Atlanta. And I eventually succeeded them in my first executive role. And so that's the detail of the story. And the benefit was they were all so different. it's not as if there was this one woman and then I had to think in my mind, well, if that's what it takes, then I need to be like her. There were little ones, big ones, highly educated ones, scrappy ones, quiet ones, loud ones, getting this variety, because none of us are a monolith, like no woman, no race, no age. And so to see the variety of that and feel there are pieces that I can connect to. So seeing someone like us with our gender or our race is important, because our brain literally sees it differently. Like there's a ton of research from the military that says, when I see someone like me, I hear their words differently. It just hits different. And so representation, even if it's a little, is still powerful. But when there's a lot of it, it is more than anything, I believe, confidence building. Because I wasn't trying to be a man in a man's world. Right. I wasn't even trying to be the one woman I had seen in a man's world. I realized that I could wear jeans or I could wear a dress. I could have short hair or long hair. I could be loud or quiet. I could joke or not. That seeing that landscape allowed me to have choice and not feel that my choices would then knock me out of the only type of woman that's in these. Right. I remember the 80s seeing the few women in leadership, and they all looked like they were trying to be a man.
Right.
Like with a certain suit, and literally I remember like ties and stuff. And I mean, that's actually kind of cool now, but
but it was done on purpose. So
it was like I had to conform and like change my hair and change these things. And even more so for people of color and women of color, right? Like the thought that I have to change, physically morph my person to even have a potential to fit, that is exhausting.
Yeah.
So I did not have to deal with some of that exhaustion because I saw so many examples and felt more permission, not full permission. I was still in the environment, but more permission to be me. And I didn't waste my energy trying to cover up or code switch everything I said, right? There were just more moments for me to show up as my full self. And then I was a little rewarded for it. And so I could get bigger instead of feeling like I needed to be small to fit in the tiny crack that exists for us. So that was the gift. And I see this gift duplicated for universities that are focused on only a gender or a particular race. There is a benefit to dipping in to your people and seeing all the many ways that can show up. And then coming out in the world, like the Women's Food Service Forum was this for me. I would go to these meetings with thousands of women. I would dip into this sea of women and come out stronger. Like I could just navigate the world better because I was like filled up with confidence and comfort and relatability. Now that would slowly get chipped away in some situations, but it filled me up. And so I'm a big fan as a result of, if a company is not like the perfect picture of the United Nations and gender equality, there are other ways for us to dip into our people and lift each other up in many ways as a group, and then be more confident as we spread into the world. And I absolutely benefited from that, both in those intentional groups, affinity groups, particular professional organizations, like those were important to me in elevating my connections, my relationships, and my confidence. And also having the privilege of working for so many women to figure out how I wanted to bring my womanness, into the world and into the boardroom eventually.
Yes. I think in college, I was in a sorority, and I don't know what people have very different opinions about sororities. My sorority was very business, and all the women in it were like, let's help these kids. We were like very community and business oriented. And when I used to go to these grad chapter meetings, as they're called, with older sorority sisters, they were also very much so about their business, and they were doctors and lawyers and accountants, and they were just on their shit. I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. I have these amazing women who are like all, bosses in their own right. And so I love that. And I think that they're just like, creating like those ecosystems of women who are pushing that forward. Like, yes, we can run companies. We can also be great mothers at the same time. We can be great wives at the same time. All of it together and make it happen was like really a powerful, just not only position, but image for me as I grew older and as I matured myself. Think about like how do I want to also leave that same type of feeling and belonging with other women. So a few months ago, you departed Focus Brands. Had you been planning this all along? Did you just feel like it was the right time? You know, COVID-19 changed a lot of things for a lot of people. Was that it impacted your decision? Would love to know your thought process through that and what's next.
Yeah. So I left in January. I thought I would have left 3 years ago, and I just kept getting sucked in. For many reasons. We bought Jamba Juice. It was the opportunity to take a public company private. I needed to upgrade some of the talent in the organization, and I didn't want to leave and have someone take over my role and think, oh, this is what Kat's team looked like, because I inherited, many of them when I was promoted. And so I needed to do some work, and the work was unfinished. And that was enough call for me to stay. I'd been there 7 years, but I made the commitment to be there at least another 2 to do that work. And then it became very clear that it was time. I had done the work. I'd promoted amazing presidents. I had 9 presidents of businesses reporting to me. We had restructured the company to get it ready for its next phase of growth, which will be pretty intense. And it's not that I couldn't keep learning. I probably, like you, I can learn in a box, but is it the highest and best use of my time? And the simple fact that if I continue to be there, others wouldn't have the opportunity to step up as fully, both me as a person and my role in particular after we had restructured the company. So it was super clear that it was time. And it was this, I wish this for anyone who transitions out of a company they love. It was beautiful. It was beautifully planned. It was incredibly positive. It was communicated well in advance. It was almost like a retirement, but I just turned 43 and I am not retiring. But that's really cool, when you've taken such great care of each other as an individual and as a company, and you can do that even in how you exit. And that was absolutely true for me. And so now I'm spending my energy, I'm taking at least a year, I think, to not operate other large companies and focus my energies on the 3 buckets that have always been a passion for me, but they've been in the background because, I've been running large companies and adding businesses to that portfolio. And I kept these things a bit in the background. So one is my board and advisory work. So I'm leaning into my board and advisory work. I'm on the board of Milk Bar, a beloved omni-channel brand. Slice, which is a technology company that is far larger than people realize, with world-class investors, GGVC, Primary, KKR. So I'm getting to support a high growth company that just this year will hit $1 billion in sales going through their technology, and learn from amazing investors and be on this journey with the founder and team in some small way, is very cool. And then I'm on the board of a SPAC called HumanCo, where we are looking to take a sizable wellness company public with phenomenal founders, operators, and investors. And I knew I wanted my energy to be in 3 areas of my board work: omni-channel retail, which is Milk Bar; technology, which is Slice; and wellness, which is HumanCo. These are my personal passions. I eat, sleep, and breathe these topics. And so I feel great alignment with my time and energy, in addition to being able to learn from a variety of industry organizations. So that's the first bucket, board and advisory. And I advise a handful of, from startup to high growth stage founders and CEOs on anything from brand to product roadmaps, to the leadership side of high growth. The second bucket is angel investing. So my husband and I have been angel investing for many years. And so I can be a bit more upfront about that. I can talk about it more publicly and lean into some of the great founders that I am meeting through these other activities. And then the third bucket is content and community, which is finishing my book, where the manuscript is due to Simon & Schuster very soon for a launch next year, and holding Clubhouse rooms and IG lives. And I'm acting as if I'll never have this chance again for whatever reason. And I know that's not true, but I'm telling myself, this is the window to share as many of my lessons and mistakes and experiences as possible. And so I'm doing it with a level of intensity where some people are like, are you gonna, like, is this what you're doing full time? And is this, it's very confusing for people. I'm like a walking narrative violation, but my FU energy is at an all-time high. I will say that because not everybody gets it. But these three buckets really do feed each other. Sharing content and lessons inspires people and has them want me to become an advisor or board member or invest in their company. Angel investing gives me the opportunity to share lessons and meet amazing people that I can shine my light on or my community on to help them better their businesses. And certainly board and advisory keeps me deeply connected to the business world. But I can use things like my newsletter or my Clubhouse rooms to spread the word about those companies that I'm involved in and shine a light on them. So that it's becoming this interesting ecosystem.
Right. Everything's connected.
Parts, but they feed each other. And if I go back to running another large company, I likely will, but I don't have to for my ego. I don't need to be the CEO of something to feel important, right? I know what my North Star is, and it is helping people realize they're capable of more than they know. And the way I do that may take on different forms over my life. But I'm doing exactly that right now in spades. And so for me, these three buckets, this is what's next for now. And it will serve me in some way, in many ways, I'm sure. And then it will feed whatever is next after this next.
Absolutely. I remember you were in a Clubhouse room when I first joined Clubhouse, and I was talking about the idea of being an operator angel, and how I was like, I don't really talk about that because I'm always thinking about my stakeholders and people around me, and just very quietly doing that. And I was like, man, does Kat have a tech background? She's very techy, you're very, and I was like, well, I know she works at Focus Brands, but it also seems like she's in the tech space. So I could very well see how all that has now come together in this part of this chapter of your life.
And that's right. It is a chapter. It is a season. And as we push ourselves into different initiatives and different seasons in life, I've learned that I look at it in three ways. One is there are people who just won't get it. And I have to decide if I care or not. And if I do care, then I'll make a meaningful effort to communicate, inform, educate, and partner and bring them along. Because for whatever reason, I care. They're important. They're a key stakeholder. I really want them to not only get it, but to support.
Right.
And then there are so many people who appreciate pieces of these, innovation roles. And I can lean into and use the new things I'm getting involved in to actually help other people. And then very quickly they get it. And I have to make sure I'm aligned with my values so that at minimum, I get it. I get it and I can see it. And then I can step out in humble confidence and say, there are a group of people whose opinions don't matter and they don't get it. And that's okay. There are a group of people whose opinions matter. And I'm going to respect that, honor it, and do my work to inform and educate and bring them along. And then there are a group of people whose opinions matter or don't matter, but do get it. And I can lean into that community. And that just feels like a beautiful way to be a lifelong learner. Absolutely. Over time.
Yes, it kind of reminds me, I'm not sure if you read Oprah's book, What I Know for Sure. And in that book, What I Know for Sure, it's kind of like, she's basically like, okay, there are some things I just know for sure about myself. And so when people say anything like, well, who do you think you are? I can say like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And I just love the sentiment of what you just said and how it just ties into that. Yeah. So My last question, I was having a conversation with a friend on a podcast, and the conversation was actually not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely was just talking about like how he actually likes being in corporate America on social media. He wants to continue to climb in corporate America. And that's why I love this conversation, because sometimes I feel that people are like, okay, for me to have freedom, for me to grow, I have to now go start a business, even if really all they knew was corporate America. And so he talked about how he came out into the entrepreneur world. He was like, no, I'm headed back to corporate America because I'm actually really good at this.
Yeah.
And I was like letting all these other outside influences tell me I need to go do this other thing to be able to like grow. And so I just love your story and being able to share it with those who are listening, but would also love for you to just talk about that. Not everyone has to be an entrepreneur, but also you could be entrepreneurial in the things that you do outside of even your corporate life. And I feel that you're such like a great blend of that.
Yeah, it's such a great conversation. We've come through a season which has its positives, that there is a celebration of those who start their own businesses. Mm-hmm. And that is a welcome shift, because that was not always the case. And of course, it started with celebrating people who started businesses that were outliers, like these giant, social media networks. But I do believe it has expanded to really respect being a proprietor, a sole business owner, whether that is your own cleaning company, your own restaurant, or your own technology business. So I think that's only a good thing.
Yes.
And it can create some FOMO because like, oh, you can call yourself a founder, and do I want to call myself a founder? And that seems really cool. And the danger in that, as you know, is, heavy is the head. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where's that crown? And it's a lot of stress, and it's a lot of pressure. And there are, as many businesses that start and fail as there are that start and survive. And those are the stories that don't often get told. And so for me, I do have this sense of respecting true entrepreneurship. Come up with the idea, you figure it out from the beginning. And I don't like when I see that being wrongly applied to others who aren't doing that deep, tough original work. There are other ways to speak to the entrepreneurial spirit, to your point, mm-hmm. Because that is a unique thing. And it is the hard part. There are many hard parts, but man, that 0 to 1 is like, a lot of people have ideas, getting it into something real, and something real that then makes money. And then something that makes money that's profitable is a very, it's a tough path, and for most. And so I think there are ways to be innovative, first and foremost, in whatever you do. Learning from others that are in different industries, learning from your best competitors that are new and doing things differently, and thinking about how to apply that in your company. That is a way to be innovative. And if that idea turns into activity mm-hmm. that births something unique and new, that is intrapreneurship or entrepreneurial spirit in the corporation. And it can start to give you that taste of being an outlier, starting something, although again, different, because you're in an ecosystem of resources. You may not have access to all those resources, as I know from companies, but that starts to get closer to that entrepreneurial set of activities and efforts within a company. And sometimes, even this is rare, but I love to see it, some of these ideas end up getting spun out as real companies outside of the organization, which is then true entrepreneurship, even if it had an accelerated or facilitated beginning with the ecosystem in which it was born. And then there are all these other ways to do something small yourself. That could be starting a nonprofit. It could be partnering with someone that has the passion and the idea and the vision, and you become their operating partner to help them bring it to life. And you are absolutely helping co-found and birth the company. So I think there's a continuum of an idea entrepreneur, in your own company, to then being really an intrapreneur of starting new things in an organization. There are parts of that are even harder than entrepreneurship. On the whole, it's not. But there are pieces, because you're actually having to fight a system. At least when you're an entrepreneur, it's just you. You told yourself you get it going. When you're in a company and you want to do something different, especially if it conflicts with the existing compensation systems or distracts people from their day gigs, it is uphill, wind in your face, on skates, on ice. Like it is incredibly difficult, but at least you have the safety nets that real entrepreneurs don't have of salary and resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a continuum to think about how can you express your creativity, and what is the level of pain that you are willing to endure? And if that is low, again, not that there aren't challenges in the corporate environment, but if you aren't willing to lower your personal expenses, live on a deeply tight budget, you've got to really, really constrict a lot of other things in your life if you're going to bring an idea to life rapidly.
Yes. People see what happens 10 years later, but people did not see what happened early on. And I know as an entrepreneur, I definitely was like, okay, what bill am I going to have to sacrifice and call and say, can I have a 30-day grace period because I have to pay my contractors or my employees, that one employee or two employees I just hired. And so, yes, it takes all of the sacrifice for sure when building a business. So what I want to end on is actually a tweet that you have pinned. And of course, I want to end on this because you were talking about your mom, and I feel like it's a great way to end this conversation. And you talked about giving people the permission to change.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that might be one of this generation's hardest battles. I think we deal a lot about that in the social media world. But the idea of not giving people grace along the way. And I think that you have to have resiliency, but you also have to give yourself grace and you have to give other people grace as well. And so I would love to just end on something that your mother told you, in addition to this, or expansion of this, to kind of end and wrap up this conversation.
Yeah. So my personal mantra, which I apply to companies and brands and teams, that was inspired by something my mom wrote on my birthday card every year. Once I started getting into the media, she said a version of "Don't forget where you came from," and then some other lines. But the mantra is "Don't forget where you came from, but don't you dare ever let it solely define you. Our truth is in our roots, but our past is not our anchor." And there's a lot in there, which, our truth is in our roots, which is about not hiding from the past, even if it's ugly. Mm-hmm. Whether it was ugly done to us or we had a moment of ugly. It simply is, but it is not us, right? Unless we just allow other people to tell the narrative, write the story, and fill the void with their version of the story. Mm-hmm. And so I have that belief. I am a accumulation of all my dots, of all my moments. I am not defined by any one of them. Some get more play than others. Some I tell more often than others. But that's my choice. It actually is a choice. And so don't forget where you came from, but don't let it solely define you, without honoring that our truth is in our roots. And there's something about that can actually be fuel. But our past is not our anchor. And for every one of us that has come out of single parent homes or situations like you and I have talked about and used it as fuel, there are others for whom it has been an anchor. Mm-hmm. And that is no criticism of them. It's heavy. But I hope the mantra helps people see that there is a way. I'm not suggesting it is easy for everyone, to use the truth of our past, especially the tough parts, as fuel, whether that's a chip on our shoulder, something we want to prove, or internal motivation to be something better or different. And I remember when I took over Cinnabon, and it hadn't evolved in quite some time, this was my mantra for the company. Like, we can't all of a sudden become a health food company, even though that's where the world is going. That makes no sense for that company. That's not why people came to the company. But we absolutely needed to evolve to have things like smaller portions and slightly less sweet, but still delicious items, and more coffee, given the coffee competition. And there were ways to do that, I remember some of the franchisees resisted those evolutions, even though it seems so obvious to many, and now certainly, because they said, well, wait, we're famous for being a big cinnamon roll. That's what people know us for. If we start chasing everyone else, we're going to be like everyone else.
Yeah.
And the irony was the very people who would benefit from the innovation resisted it because they were letting their past be their anchor. So in this case, I'm not even talking about something negative. I'm talking about something that's been so positive, but alone can no longer be the sole driver of the business. It needs to evolve. And there were so many fights, debates, challenges. I mean, I remember thinking, man, I'm spending more energy selling internally when I should be spending energy selling these really good ideas externally, being more relevant to consumers who are clearly telling us in 1,000 ways that they want what they love, but they want it differently and in different places. And so that journey to not let our past limit us, but also not walk away from it completely, find the way that it can actually be honored in what we did differently, was a difficult one. And it is for any of us as individuals, and it is for companies. But, the business graveyard is full of phenomenal brands that once were titans of their industry. And I don't want to be that. Right. I want to continue to grow my businesses that I run so they stay relevant with the spirit of their origins and the roots, still being intact. But I want that to be me as a person too, that I'm not just the person who was the Hooters girl, and I'm not just the person who made it to be an executive at a young age. I'm not just the Cinnabon president. I'm not just the Clubhouse person. I'm not I am all of these things, and a mom and a wife and a friend. And I do not believe that any one of them discounts the other. It is additive over time. And the more I've learned to embrace those evolutions, the easier it gets the next time to pivot, to try a new technology, get involved in a different group or business. It gets easier every time because I understand it as part of this, greater journey that I'm on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kat. Thank you for being a part of this tour. Thank you for everything that you have sown into the communities that you're a part. I know I feel it. I know others feel it. And we are definitely appreciative to have you. And always being so willing and gracious with your time as you were on to joining my tour. So I really do appreciate you taking out the time and taking up so much of your time too. So
my pleasure. And congratulations on the book. This is a message that everyone needs to hear, especially from you who have walked the walk and built such a successful business. And for you to take your time to tell this story, I hope all your stakeholders see how powerful this is for community, for the brand, for the business, for your company. And I know so many people will benefit from it. So it's a gift to me to be a part of it.
Thank you, everyone. Kat Cole. Thank you.